We are now beginning the second part of our session on AI and analytics and IoT. So there are two tracks. This is track one. There is a track two. Track one is a little more general, and basically we have a provocative thesis. There are two panel discussions in this room. The first one is things will matter now. In the past, things were inanimate and they did not matter, but they will matter now. And we have an interesting mix of people. And after that, we have a fireside chat, which I will introduce, which is even more provocative. What is our future, mankind? I mean, will we manage things or they will manage us? Are we going to be serfs or are we going to be masters? So for the first panel, without much ado, I'll ask my friend Leslie. Leslie is the technical editor at Mint. He is himself a science journalist from Boston. And with Mint runs the Emerge Young Innovators Award with MIT, which is extremely good. So without much ado, Leslie, I'll hand over to you.
Can you hear me? Perfect. So I guess if I ask people in this room, how many people have smartphones, I think you'll start looking up at me and wonder which planet I am from. But if I ask you whether you would consider your smartphone an IoT device, perhaps your reaction would be different. Now, taking the theme of today, things will matter now. In fact, when we were talking to some of the panelists, we were having a pre-panel discussion kind of stuff. We were wondering, things will matter now, and as Arvind already said, that these things, the whole ecosystem on IoT is maturing a lot. Now, if you look at certain predictions, we already have forecasts like 20 billion connected devices by 2020. The other number is from Machina Research, which says that the total number of connected IoT devices in India using a range of different technologies could reach more than 1 billion by 2020. In fact, the IoT market in India stood at 5.6 billion with 200 million connected units in 2016, and this is expected to grow to $15 billion with 2.7 billion units by 2020. And at the same time, the global IoT markets, which I guess even previous speakers have spoken about, is supposed to grow to something over $3 trillion in the same period. In fact, actually, both consumer IoT and enterprise IoT applications are driving the overall growth, and that's something that we already know. If you look at consumer IoT, it is being developed already in areas like home automation, healthcare, the quantified self, which we talk about, gaining self-knowledge through using technology, like sensors on your smartphones, for instance. I think you have more than multiple sensors on your smartphone, and you have multiple apps on your smartphones which can talk, and you can create and you can connect to a whole host of devices. If you talk about enterprise IoT, that is growing faster than consumer IoT. In fact, some research from Convergence Catalyst says that between 2010 and 2015, over $7.5 billion was invested in IoT companies in over 900 deals. But industrial and IoT solutions in basically the enterprise IoT solutions, they attracted over 75% funding in 2015, which clearly shows that enterprise IoT is gaining much more traction. In the enterprise IoT space, as some of the panelists will tell you now, that industrial applications of IoT primarily in the manufacturing, automotive and transportation and logistics sectors are expected to drive the IoT revenues by 2020. These sectors, IoT space in manufacturing, for instance, in India, is expected to generate around $4 billion in terms of revenues by 2020. I think all the predictions are by 2020, 2025. But of course, I think as all of us also know, and which we will be hoping to touch in this panel discussion, are that there are certain barriers that we have to overcome before the IoT ecosystem gets mature. One of them clearly is the interoperability of devices. Second, of course, is the security part of it, which we from the media often highlight. Third is clearly the privacy and data protection. Fourth is the reskilling of employees to have these kind of skill sets. And of course, the fifth, last but not the least, are the regulatory frameworks. In the future, some of the kind of trends that we're already seeing is that IoT will be distributed across the edge and cloud, boosted by artificial intelligence, which I guess the later, there's another panel also dedicated to that, and also containers. You already have a lot in the consumer IoT space. Like people are talking about weird contraptions which actually sound pretty weird. You have a salt shaker, for instance, which is called Smalt. You have Cube, which is a smart AI trash can. You have a Toasteroid, which is a kind of a smart toaster. You can print any design onto a slice of toast and even send these toast messages. Okay. I think this is not as smart as it looks. Yeah. And then, of course, people, you generally look into a mirror for your reflection to see how well suited and booted you are. But there's something called a Griffin connected mirror, which displays the time, weather, and status messages. And of course, it takes your own reflection also, but it sets you back by about $1,000. Of course, there are these IoT compatible TVs also nowadays. Uh, this and a lot more we hope to discuss during this panel discussion, for which I will now call on stage Shalini Kapoor, who's the Director and CTO of Watson IoT Education, and she's also an IBM Distinguished Engineer. Please give her a big hand. Next, I would like to call Bipin Pradeep Kumar, who's the co-founder and director product development of Gaia's Smart Cities. Alok Bardia, who is the VP IoT Business Unit, Tata Communications. And Subhashish Sengupta, who is a PhD Fellow and Associate Director, AI R&D Accenture Labs. Nobody missing. Hello. Yeah. So let me start with a kind of a general question. If you look at the current state of IoT, so I'll have each panelist talk about for a couple of minutes on the current state of IoT, how they perceive it. Because obviously, when you look at consumer and enterprise IoT, there are kind of different kind of perceptions. Let's start with you, Shalini.
If you talk about the current state of IoT, I think it's also important that we say how IoT is in our ecosystem in India. And in my experience, and I've been in this IoT field for almost 7 years, which was, at that time it was a research technology. And when I started working in IoT, and it was not even, people would not even call it IoT. Some people would call it M2M, and some people would call it, just non-traditional devices, because a traditional device is a mobile phone. So today, as I see, there are, even a year back, people were talking about POCs and pilots, and today people are talking about production systems doing IoT, which is IoT is in production in various forms, various sectors. Some of the sectors which we are seeing where it's going to be there and hitting the market very soon are: number one, automobile, and the second is manufacturing. Because of Industry 4.0 push, IoT was always being done by manufacturing industry, but it's got a new breath of life, and it has got, it's really on steroids now, because there's a lot of manufacturing sector which is doing production use cases which are giving them cost benefits, new business products. So I would say that today IoT is really very important and is happening right here, amongst us in the manufacturing sectors. Some of the other sectors which are not so much in India, but globally we are seeing is in the entire electronics or appliances manufacturers. So a lot of our organizations, we do work for global companies, so we'll see those embedded systems, what were embedded systems. Those kind of engineering teams have graduated into building IoT systems now. So these are, some of the areas where IoT is happening, and, there are a lot of customer examples which I can share, but maybe during the course of the panel, where it's happening now. And very soon the products are either hitting the market, or they have already come into the market in small numbers, like, 1,000 appliances or 1,000 cars or 100 devices. So, so it's definitely there, as I would say.
Thank you, Shalini. Alok, Tata Communications has said that it's betting big on IoT, basically investing $100 million over the next 2 to 3 years. So obviously there are things that will matter now, or things that are already mattering now. So please give us a perspective on that quickly.
So yeah, I mean that's true. We sort of publicly stated next 2 to 3 years, $100 million is what we'll invest. I'll talk about that a little bit and the overall ecosystem also. So what we are trying to do is basically get the whole ecosystem together. So if you think about it, things matter only when you deliver business value. So I'm talking an enterprise language here. So from our perspective, getting the whole solution together is what we are focusing on. I'll talk a little bit about, if I look at my last 3-4 years, this whole IoT ecosystem in India or globally, and I've seen it as a venture investor, which is what I was used to do for the last several years. If I look at the last 3-4 years, there's been tremendous progress, as Shalini was also saying. I mean, the thing we have to keep in mind is enterprise IoT, or for that matter, the interesting consumer examples that you gave, there are a lot of smaller system pieces coming together. So it's not, and I have nothing against software, because software is also a key part of IoT. It's not building a new app. It's getting the whole system working together and delivering a value to the customer. So if I go back 3-4 years ago to today, I've seen a lot of companies, interesting startups, there are some here as well, who started proving the value. And if you think in terms of an enterprise customer, the enterprise customer today basically says, fine, another technology. I understand IoT. So the good thing about IoT is you don't have to sell the concept, but very quickly you have to start selling the ROI. So that is what we are now seeing companies doing, and that is getting adopted, whether it's India, globally as well. There are certain sectors or certain verticals that are taking off in different ways. And I tend to split IoT in two parts. Maybe I can call it a broadband IoT, so high bandwidth. You think connected cars, you think a lot of stuff in some of the developed markets. And then there is an IoT aspect, which is what we are focusing on, the low power, low bandwidth kind of, where, the scale is much more, but the data transmission is not that much. So if I look at the Industry 4.0 example, you can look at it both ways. There is very high bandwidth, there's a lot of analytics, you can approach it that way. Or in a factory setting or a broader campus setting, there are a lot of assets. You just want to see where they are. You just want to see what's happening. I'll just conclude by saying, see, from our lens, IoT, to my mind, in a big way, is an ecosystem coming together. Not one company can deliver the entire value chain, and a lot of things come together, and that's how we are looking at it. What we are trying to do is, while we do the part of the infrastructure network platform, but a lot of solutions have to come together. And as I said in the beginning, the first question when you go and sell IoT in enterprise, there is no vanity there. So you have to deliver value. The initial question immediately is, so what's the ROI? I think that's what will, and that's a good thing in the sense that telling you the customers are very serious about it. And as they see value, they'll adopt more and more.
Thank you, Alok. I think two important points that we already would have raised during the panel discussion is one on the IoT and the big data, the kind of big data that is spewed by these sensors and devices. So IoT analytics in one, and of course then infusing IoT with AI, basically. But I'll come back to that a little. Bipin, when Alok was talking about low power devices, basically, they can be used to map the smart city application. And you are doing some tremendous amount of work embedding smartness in cities, the whole smart city program. So very quickly, IoT is matured in that kind of.
We are a startup. We are a startup and primarily in the smart city space. But while we are a startup in the smart city space, we actually have three business lines. One is the smart city consulting, which we do. The other is the smart city solutions and products. And the third is the smart manufacturing, the industrial space. And we had to do this. I mean, as much as all the investors say, just focus on one area, we had to do this because of sustenance. And I'm not telling you these three things just merely say that we're doing these, but the fact is, in the IoT space, there is the IoT provider and there is the IoT adopter. So we work with two kinds of IoT adopters. The cities, which is supposed to be among the largest consumers of, or the largest forbearers of IoT, and the other is the industry. Shalini and Alok spoke about that. In both of these, while cities want to do a lot of things, there's a lot of intention. There's a lot of intention. I still haven't seen solutions at scale or even to a certain number coming to the market yet. On the industrial IoT space, again, there's a lot of talk, there's a lot of pilots, there's a lot of proof of concepts. There is a considerable amount of work, but what I would believe is it is a small fraction of what can happen. It's a small fraction of what can come into the market. While yes, city is phenomenal, there's a lot of opportunity. We're barely scratching the surface. And as much as the topic of this talk is things will matter now, I think things will take some more time to matter now. Is my opinion.
Good. I will come to that part. That specific part that you raised. If you're saying that things will matter now, why aren't they perhaps mattering? So the kind of barriers that you're speaking. But Subhashish, infusing AI in IoT is something that even other speakers will be speaking about later. But I think a lot is being done to meld the kind of what is happening in the consumer IoT space and the industrial IoT space, both from the AI part. I mean, a classic example is that of Airbus, which uses this kind of wearable technology to optimize the aircraft assembly, for instance. And there are plenty of other such examples. So give us a perspective on this particular thing.
Thanks, Leslie. So I think previous speakers talked about different adoption mechanisms in manufacturing, in other words, the providers, consumers, different adoption mode, and so forth. As Leslie talked about, I mean, I'll take three things here, and also from the research perspective, right? How we see IoT now. One is there's not one technology which is going to matter today. It's a confluence of multiple technologies coming together: IoT, AI, blockchain, fog computing or edge computing, if you see, networking and security, and then many other things, right? For IoT to matter, the things to matter, all this technology have to come together, and the value is actually on the data. Leslie mentioned this example of Airbus. So, I mean, and also he mentioned about how IoT and AI would talk about, work together. I would actually give an analogy. So if IoT are the hands and limbs, or maybe the nervous systems, because you have a lot of sensors, I would say that, and what get flowed is basically contextual data. And you actually require AI to make sense of that. And maybe, people talk it AI and people talk it analytics, but I will actually distinguish AI from the analytics because AI is more predictive. And, you could actually take decision based on how the data context changes. So I feel this is a very exciting time. The devices prices, the affordability, the deployment is actually going up, going down or up. We have, obviously there are concerns about security and privacy and regulations, which you have to tackle. There's a rapid progress which is being made in the AI technology, especially in deep learning, which works with a lot of data and tries to mine patterns. And if given a chance, we'll actually come back to that later. But I think, yes, there is this confluence of multiple technologies. There is this, the notion of an ecosystem coming in, and that will actually make connected things matter.
I think a very valid point that you made on the confluence of technologies that are enhancing the IoT ecosystem. But currently we are also seeing that a lot of, I think, which Shalini, you had spoken about, and you are getting onto that, which I think now we should be discussing a little, is that when we are seeing the barriers to adoptions as to why things are perhaps not mattering enough now. So could you throw some perspective on that? Of course, we have the interoperability of devices, security, the entire thing of privacy data, but let's take one specific topic. What do you think would be the main kind of barrier that we see?
So I think it's not the barrier. I think it's a definition of IoT that we really need to go back to. People think that IoT is just data coming out of devices, and those are the only use cases we need to look at. But there are so many, and similar thing happened in a mobile, right? I mean, mobile is just a channel, but there is so many of things which happen around it, and it happens through that channel. Similar kind of thinking we have to get on the IoT, that the data coming from, say, a home network, or say from my washing machine, or say from my microwave oven. Now that is just a channel, that's just one source of data, but you have to marry it with lot of use cases behind it to make the whole IoT ecosystem possible. I think that when I say barrier, the barrier is that people have to consider the whole ecosystem and make that successful, because it's not just the data you are getting, but you have to say that why do you need the data, what is the ROI for that. So I'll give another example, right? Like space management is such an important thing for say a bank, right? How you run a branch, you basically the cost of the cost of electricity, the cost of energy in a branch, the cost of real estate, the cost of how many seats you need to put in a branch, how many people can sit, everything gets apportioned to say a single seat, but the entire energy is a very big factor to it. So suddenly, if you start looking that as an IoT use case, and you start making the ROI around it, that how many customer service personnel I need to keep to make my branch functional. Now you are again changing the mindset of whether I need sensors, and whether I need to do energy management, and whether I need to how do I monitor. You're changing the whole mindset and taking it to how do I make my branch operational. Now that is an IoT use case, but people look at it very silo perspective, and that's what becomes a barrier, and they're not able to justify the cost of putting sensors, or putting maybe image sensing, how many people have walked into the branch. So the business model is the biggest barrier, that people are not doing it the right way.
Yeah, so I think that's an important point that you have highlighted on the business model. I think another important point, which I think we were discussing earlier also, is the fragmentation of the ecosystem. Now, you have worked with a lot of startups in your previous avatar at Cisco also, and now currently also this whole investment. So can you give us a sense of how this ecosystem is developing, especially when in the context of startups?
Sure, and in fact, I'll also add, you made the point, are things really mattering or not? I actually have a slightly different opinion, which is why I'm optimistic about this whole thing, is I think the market, and I'm talking India here, nowhere else, the market has reached a point, as I said, where, they understand, they understand the concept. So what they're saying, to Shalini's point, is show me the business value. I think the challenge that is coming in is more in terms of, I think we are in an interesting situation in IoT, the execution side. Meaning, if for example, as Startacom, when we go and talk to customers about employee safety and security, we've read about recent incidents, right? So that's a very important thing for many large companies. Think contract workers, think huge interest. The question right now is, and this is where the challenges are. If I'm a large company and I have, let's say, 10,000 employees, and I want to not just track and monitor, but also care for their safety. And there is a small company that comes up with a solution. Now, as a large enterprise, and I'm getting into weeds here, but as a large enterprise, my comfort level, and particularly in India, is not very high. How will you do? How will you scale? Why should I take you? And I'll do it myself. Now, in case of IoT, suddenly you realize it has hardware and many other systems coming together. Because typically for software startups, the experience in India is, why would I do it? I'll put 5 people and they'll make the thing that you have. So that is one challenge that is coming in, which is, startups have very interesting solutions. There is interest from the customer side. I think this execution phase is the interesting phase where I think if startups, large companies, all of these come together and take a full solution to the customer, I think that will make things more interesting. So I think in terms of the challenges, as I just mentioned that, for a small company, that is the challenge. How do you convince a large customer? The challenge also in this ecosystem, in this fragmented ecosystem, is the customer typically is now used to an OpEx model. More often than not, you come and implement and you call it, outcome-based pricing, whatever name you give it. That's what the customer says. So you have to somehow get that business model right. I feel that I'll just conclude by saying that, and I'm talking here mass volume sort of kind of situations. If you start talking in terms of real business problems, so employee safety and security, asset management. So there's an interesting thing that we learned. Asset management for low value assets is also very important. Why? Because at the end of every financial year, there is an audit. And you say on your balance sheet, I have all these assets. And the auditor says, I don't see them. Can you give me a proof? Where is it? So if you're, let's say, an electricity distribution company and you have thousands of transformers all over the city, how do you track them? So these kind of problems, if you bring it to that level, I believe things will start mattering more and the scale will start coming in. The journey here is going to be longer. This is not software. I keep repeating that. This is going to take time. This is not your viral app download that suddenly, 24 hours later, people from Turkey or wherever, get bots and all this start download, whatever. So this is going to take time, but I still feel that we are at a very interesting point in IoT.
Bipin, you are not only a provider of these solutions, but you're also a startup. So how strongly do you agree or disagree or sort of a perspective on what
I'll
Alok
agree
said?
and disagree with some of the points that both Alok and Charlie made. See, now from an industrial perspective, we're still learning. We're still learning about a lot of things. And one of the first things is we put in machines or things to monitor machines, monitor things. Nobody told us about monitoring the things that monitor the things, right? I mean, if one of the things that monitors an equipment goes, that's a challenge in itself. How do you do that? I mean, that is something that, we hadn't even thought of till we actually got onto the ground. The next is service cost. A lot of the manufacturing facilities, so to speak, are not within city limits, right? I mean, they pretty much are either on the outskirts or in clusters somewhere else. To service an instrument or a device or a machine that goes down, it's a phenomenal cost. One service cost wipes out your annual cost or even the revenue from the entire implementation. These were not things that came about apparently. I mean, we had to learn about it. Then you figure out, from a business model, you have to build clusters, start servicing solutions around a particular place, or you build in channels wherein the channels actually go about serving, but then the channel brings another challenge altogether. Training them. I mean, the manpower that needs to go out into the market, getting that kind of manpower across the nation. Yeah? So these are challenges that were not even considered. You just went ahead blindly and said, "Oh, IoT, let's implement." And we service the entire Amul cold chain, and they are in such diverse locations that just to go there. Forget Amul. I mean, if you want to go to the Datpallapur industrial estate just on the outskirts of Bangalore, it'll cost you 1,000 rupees to go up and come down. 1,000 rupees. That's it. I mean, there's no more, and there's no question. I mean, you just have to sit down quietly at home, if that's what it is. So yes, this maturity needs to come in. This maturity needs to come in both from the company that's implementing it as well as from the company that's providing it. So these are all things that I would say to conclude.
So clearly, we are seeing there are tremendous amount of benefits, but of course, there are some surmountable challenges, as I think most of us will keep on speaking during the day also. But I think one important thing is the kind of humongous amount of data that these sensors and devices are spewing out on a daily basis. So of course, when we talk about IoT analytics, I think infusing AI in that is a very, very important part of that. I'd like you to comment on that, especially in the light of what's happening in India. You have a lot of the IoT startups, you have companies that are implementing IoT solutions, but more important, the whole smart city, smart grid, smart automation, etc., the kind of initiatives.
Yeah, so I think this is a very valid point that the value lies in the data, and how do you use the data, and how do you kind of overall optimize the entire network, especially with the sensors which are actually transmitting intermittently, they're transmitting noisy signals, You can't really trust some of those because they may get warped or garbled and stuff like that, right? I think AI is making a lot of progress. I mean, when I say AI, I'm using this rather, kind of broad definition. Although there may be, debates whether machine learning can be called AI or not, or deep learning can be called AI or not. But let's actually go with the broad definition. And we see that there's a lot of processing intelligence at the edges and also at the center or at the core, or maybe at the hierarchy level, which has come in, which is actually making the sense better. Imagine, you took the example of Airbus, and I'm coming back to the Indian examples, where millions of, it actually would have perhaps 1,000 or more sensors all over the different parts, different engine parts or electronics parts or fuel tanks or other fuselage, wings, velocity and stuff like that. And it is actually sending, maybe 1 terabyte of data over a cross-Atlantic flight. Just imagine if you were to really do a real-time analytics and, kind of cruise the plane at a right altitude, at right velocity, getting the right tailwinds and stuff like that. The kind of churning that you have to do at the back end, So that's actually is coming in how, how the big data and AI technologies, I talked about deep learning, which actually can scale up to, with the scalable architecture can actually scale to churning and getting insights from, lots of data. Then think about, for example, you are having sensors which are very cheap. They can go down, or maybe they can actually, maybe sometimes sending corrupted data. So how to actually make sense of ingestion, right? So how do you do sampling? How do you find out things which have happened over time? So one of the things which traditional analytics technologies, for whether you're actually doing time series analytics or maybe anomaly detection using something called Fourier transformations and stuff like that, which has gone on. Entire scenario is changing with deep learning, right? Time series, there are very sophisticated statistical algorithm which was presented. Now, if I, just in 2 years, deep learning actually has a model called long short-term memory, LSTM, which actually does time series analysis much more effectively, much better than the traditional analytics models, because analytics model may fail if the data volume or the patterns change. So I also talk about maybe security and intrusion detection, which is one of those cases, even in, we are tracking assets, you are tracking employees, you are tracking assets within the company, which are kind of could be very, very, we have got previous year security concerns. You have to really do a real-time monitoring of anomaly and frauds, for example, intrusions and stuff like that. That is again, earlier models based on filtering in analytics were actually not scalable. The AI-based models, again based on deep learning, is again actually proved to be much more robust, much more scalable, much more amenable to changes in pattern. So there are some of the examples which actually are coming up, and the cost of technology is coming down there as well, just as the cost of technology of the edge devices, the sensors are coming down.
So good. So we'll come to these. There's another panel that's going to talk only on AI and analytics. So we can. I'm sure they're going to cover this in depth. Even if you talk about these mundane examples, we also have the example of in agri IoT, the whole thing of Chitle Dairy. I think one of those, how cows have moved to the cloud and to RFID and then finally to IoT. But it's a very interesting example, and I think most of you in this room would know about Chitle Dairy and those examples. But let's very quickly talk in a last round on how do you gauge the metrics on IoT, because Shalini, you were referring to that. IoT metrics, how do you gauge it? How can companies look at it? 2 points, very quickly.
Are you saying user companies?
Yeah, 2 metrics that they could look out when gauging ROI.
Yeah, so I have worked, in fact, with a lot of organizations to launch IoT applications. So while I'm providing the technology and the software, actually, nothing can move if we don't partner with the right hardware and with the right provider of that service. So two metrics they have to see is, first of all, um, they have to come to the total cost of the solution per device. So for example, if it's a car and you are doing a simple fleet management application, then you need a device which will go into the car. So what should be that device, right? So if you are measuring, you have very good devices in the market, but you might not need all the data from them, or you might not need all the things which they are providing. You might need very simple, very simple, maybe just a GPS location. You might have option of, maybe using a mobile phone there also. So people get, when they want to reduce the cost, they get really creative in India from a device perspective. So one is a device, and the other is the entire software services, the installation and the maintenance of that entire model. Because I think Bipin also pointed to that the maintenance cost of managing the whole use case is sometimes very high. Whom do you send to get the device corrected, or if there is a problem in the device, do you do remote diagnostics? Do you have to send a person to that location, which is a remote location, and then get back? So the maintenance of an IoT application, how rugged it is, how robust it is, that is one thing which any company which is going to deploy a use case, whether it's fleet management, whether it is in factory shop floor, where there is already so much of data, but you want to put in some more sensors to get maybe humidity around it, or you want to subscribe to a weather service to get to know more about the ambient temperature for the machine to operate well. So there are various combinations, but essentially you need to see that, one, what is the overall cost per machine for you to deploy it, and then the maintenance cost of managing it over a period of time, not just for the pilot,
We'll
but
come.
for that.
So overall cost of machine and the maintenance part of it. Anything you want to add? Just one metric, Bipin, fast.
Well,
We are
before the
running out of
metric,
time.
can I ask a question? I mean, does
No,
anybody know?
we'll ask the. Okay,
No,
okay,
the
fine,
question
go
in the
ahead.
sense, does anybody know how much of energy is used to pump water? And this is to do with silos and to do with data itself. Does anybody know? In an average city. In India, for example, in an average city in India. In the interest of time, I'll give you, it's 30 to 40%. 30 to 40% of the energy consumed by a city is used to pump water. And now what I'm coming to is the data, the data and silos. Now these metrics don't really matter until the data is actually shareable, is usable, and you can do much more with it. So the one metric that I would say is the number of data points. Sorry, that's two. One is the number of data points, and the second is the number of data points that intersect, that can actually impact the other. So these are two metrics that I would say is
So number of data points that intersect. Alok, very quickly.
So I'll just add, risk and satisfaction.
Risk and satisfaction.
The reason is, this is qualitative, and I know, when a customer is buying, they go into ROI and all, and there's a lot of work that will go there. But risk, IoT in many instances is also about, whether it's risk about people, assets, etc. Satisfaction, when you're letting people be more efficient, even your customer feedback, those kind of things. I think those are two other important things.
Fair enough. In the interest of time, I can take a couple of questions from the audience. Yes, please. Yes, I've seen it.
You talked about smart cities and how IoT when it gets deployed in smart cities. One observation I have when I looked into many of the evolving specifications, they are still disaggregated. They are not cohesive enough for you to gather data in a cohesive, meaningful way, and then try to make decisions coming out of that. The specifications doesn't seem to be amenable to that at all. So how do we address this upfront rather than we start dealing it with 5 years later?
Anybody wants to answer it quickly?
Well, I couldn't agree with you more. One of the avenues in which it is being addressed, it is through standardization. Standardization and some kind of policy and regulation. So while the MOUD came out with this massive, smart city mission, and these are the basic premises of a smart city, that's good. I mean, that's like the flag bearer. But then there are several other departments that have come out saying, why are you doing this? If you have to align these different departments, these are the standards you need to put in place. These are the, just to come back to the data point, these are the data models you need to put in place. These are the data structures and schemas that you need to have. And then probably some element of privacy has to be done away with, because in the guise of privacy, there's no sharing happening. So yes, there is standardization is one of the avenues in which this is being addressed, but it'll be some time away before it happens.
Yeah, my name is Lalit Yagnik. I come from Eon Augmented Virtual Reality, and while I'll talk about that tomorrow, one of the key use cases of IoT and artificial intelligence and big data to enhance the humans, because all these technologies are only making the machines enhanced and making humans irrelevant, and that creates also a difficult situation. But I just wanted to get your thoughts on in terms of this IoT big data analytics. I mean, where is some kind of a governance to show that one side is the motivation, as you said, that use cases and ROI determine, but ROI can determine because now you get to the source of the data, the last truth, because data is coming from there. But where is the governance method to make sure that this data, what you are capturing, is what you are making decision on? So do you think there is any algorithms or some areas of work going on to ensure that you are not working on false data?
Yeah, so it's a pleasure answering Lalit, who's my guru. It's interesting that the governance of the data of what you are getting is still evolving, because it's a new phenomenon. It's a new phenomenon. People have suddenly discovered that my home network data there's so much of data which is going out, or my car is giving out so much of data. So what people are doing is, and I'm saying, like, I'm implementing a user-based insurance kind of a service for one of the customers. So they take sign-offs from the customer that yes, your data will be used for me to see your driver behavior, right? So definitely the insurance company is coming to know that yes, there is a data usage which is happening, but it's still evolving, because I as a person will come to know what has been done with my data, and I'll realize it only over a period of time. So the governance structures, I would say, are still very evolving in nature. Some of the industries have been able to do it, like in automotive segment, the industry itself is evolving the governance as to how much data is personal, how much is by an OEM, how much is by a dealer, how much is by the consumer, and what is the agreement between all. So the agreements are being made, and I have seen actually the agreements getting created when a new use case comes in, but in many they are not.
So in the interest of time, you'll have to make it a very quick one. Just a question, no observation. Who would like to take this question?
So I think the core strengths, bringing solutions together at low price points, in a very simple way to say, that's our strength. I think the final IoT solutions that will come from India are going to be the lowest priced in the world. That's a fact.
So I guess you will have a lot of time to network with the panelists, and I think please give them a big hand. And thank you for being an interactive audience.